Welcome to Inside Whitehall with me, James.
I mean, Jonathan Gomez.
Well, we thought this week we're in a kind of strange period. We're in what you might call a political phony war, where we're in the midst of a by-election. We're waiting for the result from Burnham. And I don't know about you, Jonathan, I was looking at the news this morning, and it's Monday, the 8th of June, and Keir Starmer is going to give a speech later, and he's talking about using AI for jobs. And there's briefings in the paper that they're going to ban social media for under 16s, which is broadly quite a popular policy, something the Tories, Kemi Badenoch, have really focused on for a year, for about a year or so. But the interesting thing to me is normally this is pitched as a kind of government policy, and reading the coverage, what the next couple of weeks are picked up, and we're apparently going to get a speech from Keir Starmer just before the result of the by-election, which is when we might get this social media ban, is if we believe the briefing today. But this isn't pitched about how to deal with the Tories. It isn't pitched about how to deal with reform. It really isn't pitched at the electorate. If you read this morning, this is pitched for Keir Starmer against Andy Burnham. It made me think briefly: should there be how does Purdah work when you're actually campaigning against a member of your own party? So we're kind of now in this weird stasis where we're waiting for this guy Burnham to come down. If he does, by-election dependent. So me and you were talking earlier, and we thought, what? How is this going to play out? Maybe we assume one scenario Burnham does come, one scenario he doesn't. What does that really look like? Because I think, and I'll get into it now with you, Jonathan. I wonder if people are going to expect something to happen almost instantly, and it's not. And then people are going to think it's never going to happen, but it will. I don't know. So it's an interesting thing to kick around. Like, is it something you've given any thought to?
Yeah, I mean, look, what I find interesting is we've had briefings into the paper from people in and around Andy Burnham who are and what it sounds like is there's an internal fight about what to do. There are those who think go hard, go early, and there are those who say do it in a more sort of gradual way. My view is this: after Andy Burnham basically said on Question Time he is coming to challenge the leadership of the Labour Party because, in his words, Wes Streeting's already started a
Because
leadership
up until
contest, which I thought
then,
was a
he'd never acknowledged it, right?
yeah, exactly. So for me, that's pitch rolling for essentially I'm going to enter the field of play quite quickly, which I also think is probably the smart move because he comes off the back of a by-election victory. His main opponent is Reform UK, and he's just defeated them. Parliamentary Labour Party is going to be breathing a sigh of relief that they've had someone who's defeated Reform. There's a lot of them who obviously think Burnham is the messiah across the water and will save all of Labour's problems. And so I think in that sense, it makes sense. June 18th, he's probably got what, a month before summer recess. You would think that
Yeah.
there's the potential then in that 4 week period for there to be a formal handing over of the reins, or at least Sir Keir Starmer comes out and says, here's the day I'm departing. Andy Burnham can then quickly say to Wes Streeting's people, we've seen the polling. You don't stand a chance. Just row in behind me. Wes will come back into cabinet. We can all move forward and avoid a internal battle. Because in their view, the way to not replicate what happened with the Conservatives is by not having leadership contests. That is, I think, the wrong lesson to take from this, but is one of the lessons they think that will come. Because ultimately, those tensions, those battle of ideas, that won't be resolved in a coronation. And in fact, in some ways, it's made worse because Burnham gets to ride in without making any promises to any of those MPs what it is he's actually going to do. So I think that my gut instinct is Burnham comes down, and within a week, I would not be shocked if we saw the 81 names. So I suspect Ed Miliband
Interesting.
has been rounding up a Louis Hague, and they put them out there, or they privately tell Starmer, here's the names. These are either going to go public, or you can do the right thing now and announce that you're stepping down.
But to your point, like the thing that he's done that's quite smart is he's kind of giving himself a bit of time because so the question time, you didn't watch Question Time, did you?
No, I didn't know.
Which is generally speaking probably a sensible move. It's not normally the most enlightening of programs, but and incidentally, I was doing some media this week, and I was in agreement as you are with a Liberal Democrat and a Labour person, and all of us were like, Question Time is it was this the day of it or the day before, but all of us were like, Question Time's a horrendous format. If you ever the government spokesman, never go on it. Da, da, da. But Burnham actually did it quite well. As Burnham came, I thought overall, I thought the Reform candidate obviously just hadn't done as much media, wasn't used to this format, and I think was like quite central. And it meant you kind of had the parties that the Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives, and the Greens, I think were the other ones. They were, no one expects them to win, so they were kind of given free shots. Although the Reform candidate did really take I think it was the Green candidate. He took
Yeah, it
her to
was, yeah, on
school
housing and
over
immigration.
immigration. That was almost embarrassing. It was so easy for him, and she was just lost for words. But Burnham, I thought, handled it pretty well. And on this thing, one thing I would say is probably best he's done it. And I don't know if you've done a lot of doors in Makersfield, and you've been out there before the question time. So tell me if this is reflective. Until Burnham said the reason Burnham said that, I don't know if it was pre-prepared. They might have had it as a backup rather than like let's definitely do it. But the audience, even people who weren't anti-Burnham, were like, "You're treating us for fools. We know why this election's called. We know why you're trying to go to Westminster. Why don't you just say it? You're a typical politician. Basically, you're a liar." Really, is what the electorate was saying. You're treating us like mugs, you know. And it is this weird thing where why would Josh Simmons, the previous MP who's allowed Andy to stand, he was doing perfectly well in his career, been a minister for a bit, had stepped down recently, but was probably going to go back in the next 12 months. Everybody knows he stepped down for Andy Burnham, and Andy Burnham's only coming down for one thing, and that was the audience it was palpable. This was just not. These were people who I think some of them that said this probably were going to vote for Andy anyway, but were angry that they were being treated like mugs. And I don't know if that's something you got on the like. Maybe they felt, hang on, we've just got to say this.
And there is that anger, right? There's certainly a portion of people who are going to vote reform because they're angry at the fact. Well, look, they're obviously more empathetic to reform, but there's also, they're saying themselves, why are we being used as pawns in some game, or why are we being used by this egomaniac? Now, those are those people obviously who would say they're not, let's be frank, they weren't Burnham supporters ever. But, there is anger about the fact that they're being used as some sort of political pawn, essentially, in this chess game that Sir Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham are locked in at the moment. And I think that was replicable before question time, and that's certainly been replicated since question time when I was outdoor knocking just at the weekend. So I don't think that's gone. So I think Burnham did the right thing by having to admit it. Now look, very clever. Wes Streeting is the one who started a leadership contest. Well, has he? Because he's not listed 81 names. He said he'll enter a contest when it happens, and I think we can all accept, Andy. The moment you said you wanted to you announced that you were running for a seat within 48 hours or 24 hours of Wes Streeting resigning. So I think both of you have started a leadership contest. Let's not pretend otherwise. But look, Andy handled the question well. He made it clear that yes, he will challenge if in this leadership contest. And I think now the expectation is all about, does Wes Streeting actually have 81? And let's be honest, if Andy Burnham does win this contest, those 81 MPs backing Streeting will come under huge pressure just to row in behind Burnham. And then the other question is Starmer really going to go toe to toe
Well,
with Burnham when it's obvious that
that's
he'll probably lose?
that's what I want to ask you about. So, I'm interested in this. I'm interested in, I guess, from a kind of like professional perspective, as someone that works in the industry, someone that goes on media and talking about this kind of stuff, and just intellectually, like what trying to work out what is going to happen. What do I think is going to happen? And one of the central things seems to be so. Some things that I think mean you would massively dispute. It's based on polling. So if let's say Andy Burnham comes down and runs and Keir Starmer runs, then I think that's what you might call a fair fight. I don't think it's obvious which way that fight goes. In that Burnham clearly has strong support in the party and with the members, but I think there's probably some support for Keir Starmer and carrying on and not having changes of leader in the Labour Parliamentary Party and with members that they feel it's been hard done to. Like, and anecdotally, I hear that there's a lot of angry Labour members, but I wonder if when it got to them and they were given the chance, and that if they could blame Wes more than anyone else, they'd vote for Burnham. But I think it's a fair fight. But I think Starmer versus Streeting, probably Rayner, and maybe Ed Miliband. well, Ed Miliband might be the different one, but I think Starmer versus Streeting, and the question if Ed runs, if Starmer runs. I mean, I think Ed is very playing the loyalty card and all this kind of stuff. But let's go Streeting versus Starmer. Starmer wins, I think, almost for
Yeah, I
sure.
agree with you. I agree with you. I agree
And
with you on that.
so that's kind of, to me, to me that it's important if Starmer's going to win, because let's go scenario, call it scenario A. Burnham loses the by-election, which is definitely possible. You know, we've had these local polls, they've continually underestimated the kind of, what you might call, I don't know I don't mean this in a negative way, but the more populist vote, or let's say the newer parties, or the parties that are doing well. So they underestimated the Greens in Gorton, and they've underestimated Reform in other recent by-elections. Reform win. There is no Burnham. Starmer says he's going to run. Well, what's the point in Wes running? He's going to lose.
Yeah, exactly. So at that point, either Rain or Miliband probably enter the field of play
But does
if
Ed?
they
Is my
want to.
question is Ed's mood music is if there's a leadership contest and Andy Burnham's not there, I'll probably run. But it's not clear to me that he runs against Starmer, because maybe that's
No,
not,
I agree
that
with you.
goes against his, that kind of goes against his, what do you call it, his kind of his brand. I think, it's kind of look almost disloyal. Whereas I think him running against Streeting,
Despite
because
James,
Streeting,
despite James, Ed Miliband, we've read in lots of newspapers that Ed Miliband's been spending the last 6 months apparently gathering names in support of Burnham, working with Louise Haig in private. But yes, he's super loyal to Keir Starmer. He has apparently told Keir
yeah, I mean,
Starmer
he took out
to
his
lay out
own
a
brother.
timetable.
He took out his own
It's,
brother. I mean, what level of disloyalty more than taking out your own brother do you want? But yeah, I'm curious if he still runs against. Maybe he does. But so on the first thing, you've spoken to Starmer a bit weirdly. I watched you have conversation with him, like, largely about football when you're an MP and he would be leader of the opposition after you come out of PMQs. What and we both, I don't know, we'll have a view on this. What is your view? Does Keir Starmer, is this all bluster? Because part of me thinks if I'm in number 10 and they say, what's the Prime Minister going to do? I've got to say he's going to fight. It's like being a manager in a relegation battle. And are you going to be here next season? If you say, no, I'm off, the players stop playing for you. You're done. You may as well just quit there and then. So, of course, you say, yes, I'm going to be here next season. And even if we go down, I'm going to rebuild. Well, you're not. You're probably going to get fired. So, is Keir Starmer just he's just a kind of Sam Allardyce in a relegation battle saying, yeah, I'm going to be here. But really, this is Sam Allardyce at Leeds in 45 days. Is he going to go? Or do you think Starmer, I speak to some people who know him and they say, this guy is super, super stubborn. Will he fight? You've got to
so,
put some magical
so
Monopoly
Nikita,
money on it.
so Nikita, my wife, has laughed because she goes, the one thing that Keir Starmer seems to not have any unshakable belief in is himself. He
Mm.
can U-turn everything else, but the one thing he won't U-turn on is him. Um, I think if he's competing against anyone else in the current parliamentary Labour Party, he absolutely goes, I'll see you on the battlefield, we'll go toe to toe.
Mm.
I think Burnham is a different game altogether because I think the numbers just show he will lose. And then the question is then, do you want to be the guy who's taken out, or do you want to be the guy that's left on your own terms as best as possible? And I think when you're faced with that option, I think, and I suspect there will be cabinet ministers and Shabana Mahmood, I heard on Sam Coates' and Anne McElvoy's podcast. Apparently, Shabana Mahmood might be one of those she's super loyal to Starmer, fully believes in him, but she's told him to set out a timetable. Now she apparently will be one of the ones who says if he refuses to go and Andy Burnham wins, you've got to go, otherwise I'm going. So, but
Although
obviously Shabana was also at one stage.
I'm worried about
Shabana was
Shavana.
also on Team Wes at one point. She was on Team
She's,
Wes
I
at one
mean,
point. I've led to believe this.
I think we should do a welfare check though, because I haven't seen or heard of her for months, which is lucky because in no way are the police in the news. So why would you want to hear from the Home Secretary? But the Home Secretary that people seem to love has completely vanished. In fact, the last time we heard from her properly is when she was briefing the paper. She has no confidence in the Prime Minister and she go. Yeah, he's the prime minister's still there. Shabana's still there. She just doesn't seem to be able to find a TV camera, which is crazy because the one thing she has been able to do for a year is be able to pick up the phone to a journalist pretty regularly. Anyway, that's my rant
Well,
over. But still, I'll
there we
believe
go.
what Shabana does when I see it.
There we go. Well, let's see. And I think, I just think if Burnham wins, I think Starmer will have a number of cabinet ministers at that point potentially go in there who are Burnham backers, let's be honest, saying, look, you got to go. I think that will be the last straw. I think there'll be some sort of communication between Burnham and Starmer directly where Burnham will go, look, do the right thing, go on your own terms. Obviously, we'll praise you to the hill, all this stuff. And I think the last straw is that he'll send in his troops in the cabinet and go, it's time to go. And if you don't go, we're going. And then that's the headline. So I think that my gut is that he has got the fight in him for anyone in the PLP currently. I think that if Andy Burnham enters the fray, I think he realises it's over. I do think he'll see the writing on the wall.
But okay, so let me give you a straw man argument, which I have, which I so I think I think the likelihood is it's more than 50% chance, maybe more than 70% chance that between that Keir Starmer goes, let's say between now and Christmas. It feels like a long time. We're halfway through the year. Yeah, but as your point, Burnham comes in, he's got recess. It's not insane. It'd be good for the country if Burnham took the summer to get himself organised before he went for the PM, I would argue. So he goes in there with a relatively formed plan and team. Um,
I mean, a
but
politician having a plan, James.
I know.
But we've been told that he's got Sue Gray around him, and she obviously did a really good job of preparing Starmer
Well,
for government. So I'm sure this will go well with Burnham.
the question is that before the election, Sue Gray brief, she was so insightful. She has a list of what she called black swan events, events we can't foresee. Was one of those events her not having a plan? That's the big question. I want to know did Sue Gray produce a list of things that could derail the government, and was one of them her? That's real foresight for you. But great that Burnham's reached out and got the person who everyone identifies with that stunning success of Labour's first 100 days in power. So successful, she was fired. But who knows?
Strong
But
start,
so
strong
I
start,
would
strong
say,
start for Burnham.
though, to Starmer, yeah, he's probably gone by Christmas. But counteract view, and tell me if you have any sympathy with this view. Burnham wins or loses and wins. So it kind of almost doesn't matter. Keir Starmer's Prime Minister. Now, Streeting, to me, there's a question: does he really have the 81 names? Because quick recap, we've gone over this on the pod before. The way you trigger a Labour leadership election is where a challenger needs to be named, like where's Burnham, whatever. They need to have 81 names. They all need to sign a form or whatever. They go to the Labour NEC, they're private, and then they're kind of ballot, like a public, like a ballot thing's called. At that point, those names are all public. But you definitely need 81 names, and they definitely will become public at some point. And then the existing leader, I think, is automatically allowed to stand. So I don't think Starmer even needs 81 names. He could just
No,
stand.
he can just stand.
And then to someone else to stand, they need 81 names. And a lot of the timetable and rules, and this is not wildly dissimilar to the Conservative Party, are then essentially made by the executive committee. We have the 22, they have the NEC. And while there's precedent and some stuff written down, these committees, and it's very, very similar with ours, we've both been through them, can essentially then just decide timetables and move around thresholds and all this kind of business.
Shabana's the chair of one of them, James. Isn't Shabana the chair of that one, James? Just your favourite
Well,
Home Secretary,
what could go
Shabana, she's
wrong?
chair of.
What could go wrong? Let's hope she turns up for it because she hasn't turned up for much else recently. But so the thing that I think is, let's say Burnham has said, "Oh, this is all West Streeting. I'm not calling it. I'm not the leadership guy. I'm just coming down to see what's going on. I fancy a trip to London." So Burnham rocks up in London, and they're like, "When are you going to call the leadership election?" Burnham says, "Well, I don't want a leadership election. I just love being down here. I've quit this role as Greater Manchester Mayor, and I'm now in PCH having tea with a mid-ranking lobby journalist, but just for the sheer hell of it, right? You need to speak to Wes Streeting. Wes Streeting starts to think, well, I'm going to lose this. A few of his backers say, look, don't really fancy supporting a loser anymore. And he then thinks, well, what's the point of this? And he goes to Burnham and says, I'll do a deal. And Burnham says, don't need to do a deal, mate, because you don't have a chance. I'll just wait for my time. So Wes says, well, I'm not calling a leadership bid. I'll look really disloyal. I'm not very popular anyway, even if he does have the numbers. You know what? I'm going to leave this to Andy or someone else. They go to the cabinet, which is basically what happened after the locals. They tried to get Shabana, probably if they wanted to get her on the phone, they should have probably got one of the journalists to call her up because then she would have answered. She didn't answer the phone. God knows where she was. And none of the other cabinet was resigned. Ed Miliband's briefing the papers that he's loyal, but he wants Thomas to go. But they all say, no, we love our ministerial cars. I'm waiting for the next great write-up from The Spectator. I'm not getting involved in this. You go off, right? So no one's causing leadership. That means then I think there's a plausible scenario that there's just no leadership contest for quite a while, and everyone just sits around pointing at each other like that famous Spider-Man thing where all the Spider-Mans are pointing at each other, saying, "Well, you call a leadership," and they're all like, "No, you call a leadership election,"
By the
and we
way,
get
James,
past Christmas.
wouldn't that be the most Starmerish thing to happen? Wouldn't that be
Yes,
the most Starmerish thing of all to happen?
yeah.
Nothing happens. Just lots of fake like smiles and handshakes and everyone's mates, but like just it'd be the most Starmerish thing to happen. Actually, in some ways, look, for a laugh, I wouldn't want to say it for the sake of the country. It'd be terrible for the country. But if you just want to have a laugh because you just given up on the idea that politics can ever be functionable, that is probably the most Starmerish thing to happen
I think it's
going.
an. I think it's. I don't think it's like the most likely thing to happen, but I think it's what you might call underpriced. I don't think. I think there's just an assumption that we definitely get a leadership campaign, and I think the high likelihood is we do, and Starmer's gone by the end of the year. And if Burnham wins, Burnham is prime minister. You know, quite likely by the time of Labour conference, that's around the end of
Out
October,
of
is
out
it?
of interest, James, because you've been involved in leadership campaigns and you've also been a special advisor. Do you think Burnham should go? Do you think it's smarter for Burnham to go quicker, or do you think would you tell Burnham, look, take the summer to get all your ducks in a row, who you're going to hire into number 10, who your cabinet's going to be, and pull the trigger at the end of summer recess? Is that what you would think would be the smarter move?
So, removing the fact that this might be beyond your control. So, Burnham's team Andy himself, need to prepare as if they're going to enter a leadership election the day after they get here because Wes might call one. Honestly, if anyone asked me for my advice, I would say I don't think you need to be super close to this. You just need to watch the last few years. Liz Truss came in. I mean, she did have the summer to build up. I mean, people, if they think back and you criticize Liz Truss, and this shows that they didn't do it very well. But because they knew they were going to beat Rishi, or they were very confident, they did spend the tail end of the Tory leadership contest in that summer of 21 or 22, was it? Um,
22.
22, yeah. They did spend the tail end of that summer of 22 really down in the Foreign Secretary's mansion, which everyone has called, all plotting for how they're going to run Downing Street. And it still went, you know, we're allowed to say tits up on a podcast, I know. It went tits up. We didn't go very well. So the, I think the lesson of recent history is they need some time to prepare. They're going to get smashed in the face. You do when you go to Downing Street or government. And they need a really solid 100 days and then a 6 month and then a 12-month sketch plan. Less and less detailed, they can get some time, but they really need a plan. So I would strongly say, if they can, the smart thing to do for everyone, for them and for the country, and then for the Labour Party, because they will be judged by this, which we'll get onto in a sec, they should have a plan. They should say, look, let's spend the summer getting smart people in a room and build a proper plan for government. I think it's probably going to be a disaster anyway. But if they don't do that, we're definitely in for like a not very good government. But you know, the
That's
problem is
interesting.
people are desperate for power, and I don't know if it's. I think the problem is, as we've just discussed, who's control. They're in this circular thing. So Burnham's going to be worried about Wes going. Wes is going to think, well, Burnham's going to get here, and he's going to trigger it because that means he wins. So it's a tricky one. The thing we touched upon, which you know, so look, I was at your election count in 24, and we've touched on. some of the leadership shenanigans in this episode and previous ones, and what that did to the Tory party. One of the things going through my mind in the last couple of weeks, when I've been talking to Labour people and they said, well, what do you think about this? And I've said, actually, I think you should have held on to Starmer for longer. He's awful. His approval ratings are terrible and he's not doing a very good job. But I think in the medium term, you'd be better off getting more, as much as you can out of him on the things you've promised the electorate. And, you know, all jokes aside, like Shabana's made some progress on
Yeah,
immigration. And I think is seen to of. I think the public at the moment have a vague feeling that there's a Home Secretary that does think this is important. And that's a change from when they had a vet who I don't think they really believe that of, and understandably. And so, you know, I one of the things that made me think is Starmer's the most unpopular leader in the country. And we got Boris was pretty unpopular. Starmer's actually more unpopular than Boris was. People forget that. But Boris was pretty
problem
unpopular.
is trust, James.
Yes. And so Labour said, let's change him. Let's get rid of the unpopular person. But we did this, and what happened is the Tories as a whole just became unpopular. So, as someone who's been through it, you have been an MP in a government where the leader is unpopular, and you've been with a group of MPs and said, let's get rid of this person and bring in someone who's going to do something different. Do you think, do you see it? Do you see, is it all a totally different situation? Where do you think this work goes out for Labour? My quick view, which I've said to you, is I think they're now going to contaminate the Labour brand and they're going to move the unpopularity just from Starmer, as it is now mostly, to the wider Labour Party. But you've lived it. I haven't in the way you have.
Hey, look, so I'll give you the example and I'll put a disclaimer on it. I'm sure Rishi Sunak's team would say, had they come in immediately after Boris and not had Liz Truss, things could have worked out differently. And there is a big if in that, okay? So that is a factor. But let's just go on what happened. Rishi regularly told Conservative MPs and showed data saying, I am popular. I am far more popular than the Conservative Party brand. Trust in
So he
me
would say
that
this in
after
meetings.
say it in meetings, or his team would say it in meetings. Trust me, the strategists that CCHQ were employing were saying, that's why we're putting Rishi's face on leaflets. We're talking about Rishi rather than the Conservative Party, and Rishi will help drag the brand up.
But let
Now,
me stop
actually,
you there. People might be interested in this. So you're an MP. Who and why is showing you this? Like, is this on a WhatsApp group with loads of people? Are you being invited to meetings? Is this direct from Rishi's team? CCHQ, like, so, because I assume this is what Wes and Burnham are doing now. So if you give us some insight into, like, how do these leadership hopefuls say to you as an MP, hey, I'll get me in, I'll sort this out.
So literally, I remember when this is when Rishi's leader and he's prime minister. CCHQ briefings with us as target seats, as defence seats, were being shown data showing the party polling and the Rishi's polling early on in his premiership and the difference in the gap there and how they saw that as an opportunity. When we had our meetings one-to-one with party strategists to talk about what we're doing in our areas to obviously build up our own brand and build up our own name recognition in our own areas on issues as well. So that way then we could get credit for certain things that we've delivered. You got it from the whip's office when you had your one-to-one with your whip, or indeed if you were like me having to regularly visit the chief whip for a number of reasons. You were being reminded that the Rishi's popular. You just need to sort of row him behind him and trust him, and stop being a pain in the backside. I think
Did
it's
that
certainly
work?
alluded to that I
Did it make
was.
you think at all?
I personally didn't buy it, in the sense of I did buy Rishi at the beginning was more popular than the Tory brand, but I didn't think Rishi was popular enough, like to be a net positive overall. I was busy knocking on doors and people were just saying the Conservatives in a negative way. And so, for me personally, in my community in Stoke North, Kidsgrove and Talk, I was a bit like, this is all, it's done. I told you in January 2023, I thought it was done. And
Yeah.
door knocking into those local elections and having the local elections in May 2023, as we did for the city council for all out, it just that those elections reaffirmed the inevitable. It was a case of trying to damage limitation. And as I said to people privately at the time, it was about making sure the gap to Labour was sufficiently narrow enough that the seat could be challenged again, not giving Labour the majorities they used to have in the early 2000s and 1990s in order to, mean that the Labour couldn't take the seat for granted, or at least it could be challenged again in the future.
But what do you think? So you live through this, and you must have really been thinking about it more than most people because your job's on the line. What do you think was the big damaging things on the Tory brand, the things that meant that you, as a kind of a Conservative MP, some people know you as Jonathan Gullis in Stoke-on-Trent North. I've been there. You've got good name recognition, but by and large, in 2024, tell me if I'm wrong, most people were going, "Who do we want to run the government? You know, what parties do we like?" So you had some personal votes. Some MPs will have that. Some people a bit more. Some MPs will have none. But what do you think on that 24 election? What were the main drivers, two or three, that that meant the Tory brand was in such a bad state, which it undoubtedly was at that point? And secondly, you know, I guess to the leader thing, like to me, I just don't really know the leader solves this. But do you look back and think, because you've said you think we'd have been better off sticking with Boris? You said that, I think.
So, on your first question, what were the drivers? Illegal, look, again, it's specific to my area. And you know this, but for listeners, I represent an area that was 73% in favour of Brexit. In fact, Stoke-on-Trent was the Brexit capital of the United Kingdom. It had been a long-term member of the voluntary asylum dispersal scheme. People had literally lived with the reality of seeing illegal migrants and asylum seekers placed in HMOs and houses in the community.
The hotel
So the
across the
failure,
train station.
literally the hotel across the train station. So the failure to attack illegal immigration was the most probably obvious thing that came up. The second thing was just generally everyone looked around them and felt everything was getting worse. The high streets were looking dirtier, more shops were shutting, and nothing was being done about tackling that. People felt that they were paying more and more, yet the NHS was waiting lists were longer, couldn't get an 8 a.m. emergency appointment with your GP. And so there was just this general feeling of the Tories had been in and things were worse than they were at the beginning. And that is normally, I think, for most people, a sign that they feel that, I'm sorry, but you've promised levelling up money. I haven't seen or felt it. You promised us to look at some train lines being reopened. We haven't even got past the business case phase. It's all just in the residents' mind. It's all just fantasy politics. You're promising us the earth and nothing. I'm not seeing any reality on the ground. My energy bills have gone up. My mortgage has gone up. The shopping bill's going up. And all I'm hearing is that you're going to regenerate the high street. And yeah, I look around and it looks worse than it ever has done. And so I think there was that general feeling of just, you've had 14 years and you've not delivered the significant change that I could say I can see in my community. So I think that was the driver. I think with the you are correct on this podcast. I've said to you, looking back when with hindsight, I think we just stick out with Boris as backbenchers. We can then use that to our advantage to say, look, we'll behave ourselves to a certain degree, but you have to do X and Y on. In my case, it would have been immigration. It would have been levelling up. Others would have said on farming maybe, or on rural communities, or on housing. Some would have said social care, the NHS. We all would have had different priorities. But as a backbench, you could have really used your collective power. Say to Boris, we're the ones who keep you in office. We're the ones who can take you out of office. It's time for you to stop listening to your advisors in 10 Downing Street, and you need to spend more time with your parliamentary party and hearing out and using Graham Brady as the
Let me pick you up on that as well. So, in no way is this because I was in advice at one of these, advisors that get blamed for a lot of stuff and take the credit off to the things they probably didn't do. But and so I'm not. You probably got a valid point, but I'm curious, kind of what it is. So from my side, I think when you're getting people say listen to MPs, I'm like, what? There's a few hundred of them. They're pulling you in different directions. It means you've got a total lack of consistent message. It means you're U-turning. So it's like, the MPs want this. We're now doing this. It's kind of not working. We've got to do this. So for me, as a special advisor having sat in a couple of departments in Whitehall, I think that's a really bad way to run a country because it means you're getting pulled around. Also, crucially, the prime minister. I don't think people want to like their prime ministers. I don't think they want to definitely go for a pint
yeah.
with them. But I think they want to. I think why is Farage popular because he seemed to know his own mind, and he's like. I don't think we want a strong man, as you would use the terms. We want someone who knows their own mind, who's got the courage of the convictions. Let's say a quote you would often use about Margaret Thatcher, and probably Tony Blair, two of the
No,
most
definitely.
consequential prime
I'm glad.
ministers we've had. So this is the opposite. If you're the prime minister and you're like, "Hey, what do my MPs think? Oh, they've said this today." So, that I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying, you've seen it from the other side. So why do you feel that prime ministers need to listen to MPs more? What's the thing that you would look at advisors and say, well, they just don't understand this. They should.
Look, my
Where's the
view. So number one, I don't disagree with you. That isn't how you should run government. My view would be that Graham Brady's the chair of the 1922 in the Conservatives case. Are there a few figureheads across the broad church of the parliamentary party that have good links with their certain wing or view, and that could be the conduit to maybe come forward with like a sort of this is at least the vision, this is the direction of travel. You Prime Minister can come up with the policies, but this is where we need to head. Everyone's agreeing to sacrifice certain elements of certain policies. The guys on the right of the Tory party have said, fine, on certain things, maybe we'll climb down on, I mean, maybe on net zero, be like, we're not going to rebel as much, but we're not going to vote for it. We might abstain, but you've still got the numbers to get it passed through because obviously the opposition will vote for it as well. So in terms of like, we want breathing space to be able to abstain on stuff like that because we don't agree with it, but we're not going to go in the chamber and lay down amendments and stuff like that. We're not going to cause havoc. And I think, I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying that if you're an MP, that's where your power would lie. And if you want to use your power, rather than taking out a leader, maybe that would be a more productive thing to sort of push your agenda. I
and
think the
just
problem with
who are you doing that for? Are you doing that? And be on it. Are you doing that for you and your beliefs, or is that because you
it's your
genuinely
political
think?
ideology, isn't it?
But what about the electorate? Where does the electorate figure in?
No, so I agree with you, but I think the problem is, as MPs, you're sitting there thinking your views will benefit your electorate. Your
Okay,
ideas will benefit your electorate. So in your head, you're like, what I'm suggesting, what I want us to do is not just attune with my political beliefs, but is also will demonstrate to the public the competency and the deliverability and the reality that
okay,
our political perspective is the right one. So I think you
um,
merge you see it in like you see it like that. I'm not saying look
makes
for
sense. No,
some
that makes
maybe it's just
sense.
that's how I always saw it. I always saw it as that like I told you my politics shifted by being an MP in Stoke-on-Trent and seeing the lives of people very different to the one that I grew up. And so I think as long as you're attuned to that, I think you're aware of it. Everything I tried to do, for example, tackling immigration was not something I got into politics to talk about. I talked about it because it
Mm.
had a direct impact in my community and people raised it. That's why I took such an interest in it to the level I did, because it was so impactful. For example, I would have been free trade though is something I would have come in as a laissez-faire kind of Tory. I left a much more protectionist because I saw what was happening with the ceramics industry and stuff like
Mm.
that. So I think, those are things I didn't I wanted to talk about education. I wanted to talk about high street regeneration. I ended up talking about other things because of my community. My political beliefs, I then think were like, well, here's my solution to that problem. And I think that my political ideological perspective is the right solution to that problem. Now, obviously, others may, I'm yet to be. People can prove me right or wrong on that. We'll find out, won't we, in the fullness of time. And I think that's where it comes from. I think that. So you're right. It's not a healthy way. What I'm saying is, I think that at least, and I think the overriding factor for me is Boris Johnson won the mandate from the public. Keir Starmer won the mandate. People went to the ballot box and said, I would prefer to have Keir Starmer as Prime Minister than I would Rishi Sunak or would Ed Davey or would Nigel
Mm.
Farage. And so replacing the leader, as you say, who's the figurehead, and we are in a system where I think people are more and more voting for the figurehead or against the figurehead, let's be honest, in our political system. I think you insert Andy Burnham, Labour MP is going to go. He's just beaten Reform. And maybe let's say the Survation poll that suggested a 10-point lead. Oh, this is it. Reform peaked. That's it. We're on the way to victory. I think they're living in cloud cuckoo land because the guy who was taking the most flack, Keir Starmer, has now gone. And instead, you've now just got the Labour Party brand. And the whole time that Keir Starmer was taking punches, the Labour brand too was taking punches. There is a
Mm.
reason Andy Burnham's posters say vote Andy for us. I saw one poster in Makerfield yesterday that said vote Labour. Everything else is vote Andy for us. It doesn't mention the word Labour on any of the posters.
So, do you
That
think
should
the
be a
Labour
warning
brand is
sign.
already gone? Do you think the Labour brand is already gone?
I think I think the Labour Party brand is fundamentally damaged. That Andy Burnham might be able to improve it slightly, but nowhere near significantly enough to save them to the degree that Labour MPs will delude themselves into believing they can be saved, in my view. And what do you think? Do you agree, James, on that? Or do you think Burnham maybe can do some things that, maybe he can deliver a different agenda? Maybe people will see a different side to Labour and they'll buy into it. I just struggle with that because we've got a newspaper report saying the IMF might have to help out the UK's economy. we know the war in Iran has meant that interest rates are staying higher, inflation's going to stay
The
higher than
ECB are going
target.
up. So the reports this
The EC,
morning, the European Central Bank is about to put up interest rates. They haven't, as we're talking, but it was in either the FT or the Times, and that there's an expectation that that'll be one of two rises. There's still no prediction that UK interest rates, and neither me or you are in finance, but this is reading the newspapers on the way in this morning. There's still no implication that the Bank of England will be putting up rates this year. But it's interesting, the ECB and their inflation, I think, is about 3.2, 3.4 percent in the Eurozone, which is where they would control interest rates for. But yeah, I mean, I think on the Labour brand stuff, I think the problem is in Westminster, and dare I say it, on the various podcasts that exist, people kind of sit and talk in isolation, like, "Oh, let's change Burnham for in for Andy Keir Starmer." So the problem is, and again, me and you have lived this, right? And when I'm talking to people, I'm trying to like get them to understand this. Jokes aside, I kind of joke about all these Labour MPs going on and going, "Oh, we're all going to be very friendly with each other. We're going to have a battle of ideas." That's what the MPs like to say. They like to talk about leadership contests. We have a battle of ideas. Well, to a degree, yes, but I mean, and Blair said, we need to talk about ideas, not personalities. We haven't had much. We've had Burnham just U-turning into current government policy, right? And that's not. I'm not saying that to be flippant. That is true. You know, Andy Burnham kind of questioned fiscal rules and whether we should be in hot to the bond markets. Then, about 2 weeks into the campaign, said, "Well, I'm going to stick to Rachel Reed's fiscal rules." He then did an interview last week where he
by
couldn't
the way,
name any of
James,
them.
yeah, I was about to say, yeah, couldn't even name the
Yeah.
fiscal rules when he was then
So
asked.
either way, he's on the record as saying he's going to carry on with them. He then talked about defence bonds. I think he's U-turned on that and said no, but maybe they can look at that in some way. Various other things. So really, at the moment, what you've got to say is Andy Burnham is definitively a better communicator. It comes across more naturally than Keir Starmer. That's it. There's no other changes. So is better comms, and it's always a comms problem apparently, is better comms going to change the Labour government over the next 2 years? I think in a couple of months, speech, appearances, yeah, it could. I think it could. I think Labour probably will get a bounce if Andy Burnham comes in. But I think in the long term, if things don't change, to your point, people don't look around and think, "Oh, it's got better." Me or anyone else, whatever you're earning and paying, I've just redone my mortgage. It's the same as it was 2 years ago. And the interest rates aren't going to go there. Again, don't take our advice for this. This is my opinion as a kind of layman. But me looking at it, uh, you know, I've got a couple of months till it's up. So I've booked a mortgage. And if it goes lower, I can take that one. And if not, this one clicks in towards the end of the year, in September or something. Now, I don't think it's going to go any lower, is my guess. There's a chance, but it's unlikely. So my bills aren't going down. Our energy bill has just gone up on average by £300 a year. And generally taxation's at the highest level. All the stuff we know, all the attack lines you could label on Labour. What's he going to do about that? Commons is going to help you with that. And I think the other thing that I might be wrong, and you will be a better judge of this. If I'm your average guy or girl, I'm wandering around. I'm not that tuned into politics. You told us about this person. You knocked on someone's door. We're 2 weeks into the election, and they didn't know an election was going to happen. Westminster, everybody knows. They're obsessed with it. People living in the constituency are, what are you on about? If I'm wandering around, I'm going to look up at Labour. They're going to have a leadership contest. They're going to start slagging each other off. Battle for ideas, yeah, maybe a bit, but really they're going to say, "Well, Wes, you did this. You were around." What did anyone? Burnham is going to say to the rest of them who run against him, "You were all around Starmer's cabinet table when you did this, this, and this, and this." They're going to say to him, "Well, when you were mayor, you did this, and when you were in the Blair government, you did this." And by the way, someone's going to point out you voted for the Iraq War, which on the left, I might be wrong about this, but I don't think so. It's not a hugely popular stance. He's going to come up with some politician's answer about that. Well, and so I think he'll end up in roughly the same situation as Starmer. I mean, I think it's delusional.
I think as you say, all I can see from based on the policy U-turns that, as you rightly say, Andy Burnham's been performing during this by-election in order to tune with the electorate that he's appeasing to, right? We've even had I want us to rejoin Europe in my lifetime drop to. I've never said we should rejoin the EU, like, and find a way around that. But he's a good politician, good communicator, absolutely. But that's all we're hearing. That basically the Starmer agenda will continue, just with a better communicator of it. But the guy's also been writing essays in the New Statesman where he outlines an entirely different vision. He keeps saying that, oh, I believe, we're talking about nationalization of water, of, even gas and electric things being flirted with, for all
Yeah.
rail and buses. And when he was asked about it, it's kind of like, oh, well, I've done a different kind of nationalisation in Greater Manchester with the private sector and public sector. I mean, what the irony is with the buses, the media should be going, well, do you thank the Tory government? Because if it wasn't the Tory government giving you the money, you would never have delivered the B network. It's the Tory government that
Mm.
funded the B network to Greater Manchester, but no one seems to actually put that on him and say, well, do you thank the Tory party then for giving you the money to do it? So I think I agree with you. And I think that when he's got to sit down and do a budget, as we say, with the difficult economic picture that certainly he's inheriting this year, and absolutely the Iran war is not of his making, nor of Keir Starmer's.
But
But
we had we
whether they
had
like it or not,
COVID, we had
I don't know, I was
Ukraine.
about to say, but whether you like it or not, you can't avoid it and it's going to impact. So at least all you're doing is sticker plasters over gaping wounds. I agree with you. Which is why I keep saying the smartest thing he can do is have an early election. The longer he leaves it, the
Yeah.
longer the situation won't improve. If there's still going to be, look, Labour will argue, well, we've got small boat arrivals down so far this year. If there's still pictures of small boats arriving in the UK, immigration is still going to be a problem on the doorstep. We know that the businesses he talks to are going to be in favour of more legal migration. What's he going to do with the visa routes for workers? Because Shabana
He's
Mahmood
got himself into a mess on business rates, I think, as well. He's made a promise. I mean, you probably got it a bit closer than me because you've got your council job and you've been up there. But he's going to cut business rates for, I think, definitely pubs and maybe smaller businesses.
pubs, music venues, and certain high street shops. And apparently, he's going to cut it by 20%. And there was a pub that Victoria Derbyshire was interviewing him, and she said, I've spoken to the landlord. The landlord's told me that change would save him 5 grand a year. Now, she went, is that really going to be the difference between a pub choosing to stay open or not? 5 grand a year when national insurance, national living wage, these are things, VAT, these are things that are actually hurting more. I mean, she said, the landlord said to me, he'd rather a VAT cut rather than a business
Mm.
rates cut. And Andy Burnham goes, oh, I have sympathy on the national insurance front. I have sympathy. And then she goes, well, are you going to get rid of it then? And of course, he doesn't answer it. Now, there's the problem, right? Because ultimately, like you say, so he's going to go to his team, or maybe we should look at national insurance. They're going to go, well, where's the 25 billion coming from?
Yeah.
Where's the 25 billion that you're going to plug coming from? Even if you do half of it, where's the 12.5 billion coming from? And by the way, this is at a time when he's also got local government reorganisation that he's inherited. And if Angela Rayner is a supporter of his, and the rumour is she wants the MHCLG job back, I can tell you now, Stoke-on-Trent City Council has an £800 million debt. I run Newcastle Line Borough Council next door, right? We're in a situation where we've said, if you're going to force us to merge, what's happening with Stoke's debt? Because how can we start as a new council on a fresh footing and have debt? Now, there's one council in the country that had a similar debt pool where Rachel Reeves agreed to pay 400 million. So that council, that new authority, has already started with a 400 million pound deficit or debt, sorry, on its books. And it's got the challenge of social care, which Andy Burnham's also saying he's not going to dodge the
It's
difficult
also,
decisions on
by the
social
way,
care.
you've also got more costs because he's saying he's going to pay. I got a text this week from the lobby, having been at the Home Office before, saying, "Well, what do you think about Andy Burnham closing Simon hotels?" I said, "Well, there's still the people still there. So where are the people? The people are going to be. This is social care. So put aside what you think about asylum. I'm talking about a very, very practical problem on the ground of people that are already in the country that require housing in some form legally." The government say we're not going to pay for hotels. Guess what? The people don't vanish. They exist. You know this better than anyone else. So they're now doing a social care thing where they're going to go, hey, here's all these new councils. To your point, loads of them have got loads of debt. By the way, here's another tens of millions of pounds cost a year that you've now got to pay that you didn't have to pay before. I mean, it's completely insane. I'm sorry, it's not sensible government. It's nuts. And by the
And by the
way,
way, what's going to
it's
happen with voters, James, in the
disingenuous.
Red Wall in particular? Yeah, it is. And what's going to happen in the Red Wall in particular? They're going to suddenly look around and go, all these houses are being made into HMOs because guess what, Serco, at the moment, and I'll tell you this now, Serco do not have to tell me as a local authority leader if they're taking any houses up and if they're putting any illegal migrants or asylum seekers in them. Serco don't have to tell me a thing. They can just crack on and do it. Landlords, I know of buildings that are being built right now, have had Serco already approach them and offer them 10-year contracts, regardless of and said the building will be returned to them in the condition they inherited it. That's new builds. And some of these landlords have said to me, we've obviously said no because morally we don't agree with it, but we better let you know because this is an
Can you
extortionate amount of
change
money being
that
put on the table.
requirement? Can you change that requirement, or is
So,
that the central
so, uh,
government?
so the best thing we can see is what I'm trying to do is this Article 4 direction where we base it any HMO, regardless of its size, would have to get planning permission. That seems to be the only mechanism that we
Mm.
think, but it's not been legally tested when it
But
comes to
central
housing
government could
asylum
change
seekers.
this. Central government could change
But
this.
central government could change that. So the central government, which by the way, some of the housing rules that they're bringing forward look like they will change it, or it will water down the
Have you
ability
written
of an Article
to
4 direction.
Shabana? I think you should write to her.
I'm going to be. Believe me, that letter is
And if
being
he
drafted
doesn't
up as we speak.
reply, we know some people who speak to her. So
Yeah, exactly. So I can try them. So I think that this is
fucking
the
hell.
thing, as you say, the Labour Party brand is damaged. Andy Burnham will give it a boost in the short term, 100% absolutely, if he wins the Makerfield by-election. No one, I think, doubts that. In fact, every party's had a little poll bounce thing when it's had a change. And Andy Burnham will probably be given as much leeway as the most when it comes to the media, to be perfectly frank, who will love the story of Andy Burnham, the King of the North, great return to Westminster, and how the PLP is going to be feeding quotes of, oh, everyone's relieved, the change is coming, we've got this great communicator, everything's solved. And as you say, the first budget will come, the top left will go, right, let's see what he's going to do. Oh, he's making cuts over here. Then the Blairites will go, let's see what he's going to invest in over here. Oh, he's giving more welfare. By the way, don't take our word for it. Pat McFadden's the one who says his own Labour MPs say, who are we going to tax more to give
That
benefits
that
to?
is going to be used a lot in the coming years.
That's going to be used a lot. And again, the fact I think you said it on the last pod, James. This is what makes me laugh. Andy Clive Lewis literally was volunteering his seat at one point to Andy Burnham and was endorsing Andy Burnham, who's now already ditched Andy Burnham because of the U-turns that he's been making in this campaign. So the
Yeah.
Parliamentary Labour Party is not even going to be fully united. I can tell you this now, and you know this because of you know MPs so well. There'll be MPs who are angry at Andy just because they've lost their job. Let's be honest. There'll be those who are just angry at Andy because they lost their job, they've lost their status, which is important to them.
Yeah.
Do we think Steve Reed, who's been a massive Starmer loyalist, do we think Steve Reed's going to sit on the back benches quiet? Because
No.
I can show you Tory former Secretary of State who didn't do that when they were on the back
Well,
benches.
what
Theresa May
about
put Michael Gove on the back bench. How did that work out?
what about Keir? I mean, Keir Starmer will be. I mean, I think this is we're in for. I think it'll be an interesting few weeks ahead. We've got more Starmer interventions. I suspect they'll up government activity. Then we've got this really huge result in Makerfield, whichever way it goes, will really have a decisive impact on British politics, for probably for years to come, really. Certainly one of the results. So I think we've covered a lot today. I mean, where we are in a week, who knows? I would say we've had a lot of new followers on the Substack, so thank you so much for following. For those that are clicking in, that's all of it, all for us today. It was a fairly lengthy one, but I think we've got through a lot of interesting topic. So that's goodbye for me. And if you are following, we're on the Substack podcast where you can get them, Apple, Spotify, and obviously our YouTube channel and TikTok channel as well. Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.